It was a stormy summer night when my friends and I decided to have a sleepover in a remote cabin nestled deep in the woods. The rain pounded against the roof, creating an eerie symphony of nature's fury. Little did we know that this innocent gathering would unleash a terror beyond our worst nightmares. As we sat around the flickering fire, swapping ghost stories, the atmosphere grew tense. It was then that we heard a faint scratching sound coming from outside the cabin. We dismissed it as the wind rustling the branches, but an unease settled over us like a dark cloud. As the night wore on, we sought refuge in the safety of our sleeping bags. The cabin creaked and groaned with every gust of wind, amplifying our sense of vulnerability. That's when we heard a soft whispering that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. Fear gripped our hearts as we realized the whispers were growing louder, closer. We huddled together, desperately trying to make sense of the unintelligible words. Panic consumed us as we realized there was something else in the cabin with us, something unseen but undeniably malevolent. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. We screamed, fumbling for our flashlights, but their feeble beams only revealed fleeting glimpses of movement in the shadows. Something was lurking, just beyond our sight. The whispers turned into chilling laughter, echoing through the cabin. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating us with their sinister presence. We scrambled to find a way out, but the doors and windows were sealed shut as if held by an invisible force. One by one, my friends disappeared, snatched away by an unknown entity. I was left alone, paralyzed by fear, as the laughter grew louder and closer. The walls seemed to pulsate with an otherworldly energy, trapping me in a nightmarish maze. With nowhere else to run, I stumbled into the basement. The air turned heavy, and the temperature plummeted. I could hear the entity drawing nearer, its footsteps echoing through the darkness. I clutched my flashlight, my only source of light and hope. As the entity closed in, I noticed a faint glimmer in the corner of the basement. It was an old mirror, covered in dust and hidden behind a tattered curtain. With no other option left, I stepped towards it, holding my breath. In the reflection, I saw a grotesque figure, its eyes glowing with malice. It reached out, its fingers stretching through the glass, trying to drag me into its world of eternal torment. With a surge of courage, I shattered the mirror, releasing a burst of blinding light. When I awoke, I found myself lying on the cabin floor, surrounded by my terrified friends. The storm had passed, and the cabin was peaceful once more. We stumbled out into the morning light, shaken but alive. To this day, we don't speak of that night. We carry the memory of the whispers, the laughter, and the entity that hunted us in the darkness. It serves as a chilling reminder that some secrets are better left buried, and some cabins hold horrors that should never be awakened. It was a typical Friday night, and my friends and I had decided to have a sleepover at my house. We were a group of 5, all daring each other to stay up late and share the scariest stories we knew. Little did we know that this sleepover would turn into a terrifying nightmare. As the night grew darker, the atmosphere became charged with anticipation. My friend Sarah was the first to share her story. She told us about a haunted house on the outskirts of town, where a family had been brutally murdered years ago. Legend had it that their spirits still roamed the halls, seeking revenge on anyone who dared enter. As we huddled together, the room seemed to grow colder. It was then that we heard a faint scratching noise coming from the attic. Nervously, we exchanged glances and decided to investigate. Armed with flashlights, we made our way up the creaky staircase. The attic was shrouded in darkness, and our beams of light barely penetrated the gloom. We cautiously moved forward, the scratching sound growing louder with each step. Suddenly, the noise stopped, and an eerie silence filled the air. We stood frozen, our hearts pounding in our chests. Then, out of nowhere, a shadowy figure lunged at us from the darkness. We screamed in terror, scrambling to get away. It was only when we reached the safety of my bedroom that we realized one of our friends, Amy, was missing. Panic consumed us as we desperately searched the house for her. The clock struck midnight, and the house seemed to come alive with sinister energy. The walls whispered, the floorboards groaned, and the air grew heavy with a malevolent presence. We were trapped in a nightmare we couldn't wake up from. Just as hope started to fade, we heard a faint cry for help coming from the basement. With trembling hands, we opened the basement door, revealing a dark abyss. We descended the steps cautiously, our flashlights shaking with each step. At the bottom, we found Amy, her eyes wide with terror. She whispered that something had chased her through the house, something that wasn't human. We didn't waste a moment, racing back upstairs and out of the house. As we stood on the lawn, catching our breath, we looked back at the seemingly innocent home that had become our worst nightmare. From the attic window, a figure watched us, its eyes glowing with a sinister red light. It knew we had escaped, and we couldn't help but wonder if it would come for us again. Years have passed since that fateful sleepover, but the memory of that night haunts us still. We've tried to forget, to convince ourselves it was just a terrible dream, but deep down, we know the truth. That house was a gateway to something unspeakable, and we were lucky to have made it out alive. So, if you ever come across a house with a dark history, heed my warning and stay far away. Some nightmares are more real than you can ever imagine, and they're waiting for their next victims to step inside.